Finance bros and pros on social media can sometimes give misleading or inaccurate advice. Today, we're talking about the most overused and sometimes confusing terms. I'm John Perrings with StackedLife Financial Strategies. And what's exciting about today is we're getting the perspective of two generations, Gen Z and Gen X. We're going to drill down and skim the fat off of some of these topics here.
Hello, my name is Cassius Phillips, and I'm here representing Gen Z. I am a fresh econ graduate, a marketing connoisseur, and a finance enthusiast. And I'm excited to be talking with John. I'm going to be giving him a couple questions today, and going to be bouncing off one another and going generation to generation, see what we think about all these financial trends that have been popping up.
Awesome. All right, Cash, kick it off. Do you have a question you want to ask from Gen Z to Gen X?
Yeah, I'll go first off the list. So looking around social media, I see this term wealth mindset. I see it all over. I see it constantly. And I just wanted to bounce that idea off you and say, what do you think of as someone a little older than me, a little more experienced, when you hear that term wealth mindset?
Yeah, it's like a lot of terms out there that a lot of times they can mean just about anything. And if you look at wealth is something that is accumulated over time and hopefully passed along through generations. You hear terms like new money and old money, and wealth is just created by the decisions you make with the time you have available to you. Wealth mindset, when people are talking about it on social media, I think it's a positive where it's hopefully impacting people in a way where they're thinking about making decisions that will build rather than consume. The thing is, we just don't know exactly what wealth mindset means when it comes to the details of how to actually implement that. And so a lot of times what a wealth mindset boils down to is like investing. And oftentimes with investing, people will have ulterior motives sometimes because they want you to invest in the thing that they're involved with. But also a lot of times investing involves risk. And I don't think enough importance is placed on that side of it, where a lot of young people are told that because they're young, they can afford to take risk, quote unquote. You can afford to take risk because you have time to bounce back from any losses. But what's not covered in that attitude is the fact that if you lose, you also have more time for that real loss, meaning what that could have grown to if you hadn't lost. You have more time for that to actually become a bigger loss over time. So that part is not usually discussed, and young people are often told that go ahead, it's okay to take on risk because you have time to come back from it. So the wealth mindset in a lot of what I see on social media is really just invest, invest, invest. And the challenge with that is the number one rule of investing is to buy low and sell high. And right now we're at all-time market highs pretty much across the board. The stock market's at an all-time high, real estate's at an all-time high, yet people are still being coached to buy these things currently. Where if you look at a lot of the really big institutional money, just look at Warren Buffett's company, Berkshire Hathaway or Apple, these companies are sitting on hundreds of billions of dollars in cash, just waiting for the right opportunity to buy something. And usually that's when you see a across the board market correction, everything drops in price. A bunch of people lose money because they have to sell. And then those companies come in and scoop it up on the cheap. And then it grows their wealth even further. So wealth mindset is great. I would say that I wish people just focused a little bit more on savings, which is a fancy way of saying that is capital accumulation. And by doing that, they have the ability to take advantage of some of the changes that are going to be coming along rather than react to them. And a lot of times that's what that ends up happening to people if they just invest, especially when they're investing in things like 401ks and other qualified plans where they're just locking their money away for 20, 30, 40 years. And they just have to take whatever they get with these market corrections. So I think rather than a wealth mindset, I would say having a mindset of financial control is probably a better thing to look at, especially for a young person. And in fact, I'm seeing Gen Z have a little bit more of that attitude where they're a little bit more skeptical of some of the typical financial planning out there. They're kind of like, I've seen my parents and I've seen other people, and it just, what is even happening with this? I don't really trust that I'm just putting this money in here. So I'm seeing some more skepticism from Gen Z, which is promising and heartening to me, because I do think that having a wealth mindset is first about control and understanding what's going on rather than just investing.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to something that you brought up a while ago at this point, but you were talking about how there's new money and there's old money, but a lot of what comes from accumulating wealth is time. Not a lot of people are
Correct.
just going to wake up one day and $1 million is going to appear in their hand. So when I see this term wealth mindset, I think about the gap of people that grew up with some money in their household, maybe learned how to best save that, how to maybe grow that without accumulating as much risk, just little tips and stuff like that, versus the people who are now slowly, of course, but coming into money and don't exactly know how to take on this wealth mindset or whatever you want to call it. I prefer to
Yeah.
honestly think of it as a saver's mindset, which is almost the opposite of wealth. But if you know how to save your money, then you know how to accumulate money.
I think that's great. And I do not agree with you that saving and wealth is opposite of each other. And so I think you're on the right track where, you know, over the last maybe 15, 20 years, people have given saving a bad name because interest rates have been low historically over the last 10, 15, even 20 years. Interest rates have gone down and down, and that has really affected savers. And then we see inflation, of course, going up. And so a lot of people are like, you have to beat inflation if you're going to get anywhere. And that's true to a certain extent. But the thing is, it's caused people to again focus on investing, and they're chasing rates of return, they're chasing returns in order to beat inflation. But what's not discussed is the risk they're taking on, because they can lose money. So
Mhm.
I agree with you that being a saver, if you can actually save and you have a way to do it strategically, which is what we do with the infinite banking concept, if you can save strategically, you don't need to get high rates of return, because take what everybody says about the S&P 500. They say you can get a 12% rate of return, which is high, by the way. But they say you can get a 12% average rate of return. Well, okay, so you can get a 12% rate of return, but maybe or maybe not. Like you might get that and you might lose money, right? We don't know what's going to happen.
And
And
that's still one of the most stable investments you can make, but there's still risk involved.
I don't know that I would call it stable, but it has a track record over the last X number of years. And but it has performed on average that way. But the problem is, we don't get to call up our stockbroker at the end of our 30-year career and say, hey, I see I got a 12% average rate of return over the last 30 years. Can you go ahead and put that in my account? That's not how it works. You get whatever you end up getting. And
Mhm.
and so volatility is part of that, and we don't know what actually is going to happen. But what I was getting at from a safety and wealth building perspective, so the wealth mindset, if you have a strategic way to store cash and capital and then get some leverage on that capital in a safe manner, which is what we do with IBC, the infinite banking concept, you can reuse your money multiple times, the same money multiple times. And if you can get 3-4% rates of return on the same money, that's the same as 112% rate of return, and you didn't take any risk. So this is what we try to set people up with, where this typical mindset of going out there and just taking on a bunch of risk to hopefully win, they're really just gambling. And if you've ever been to a casino, I don't know if you've ever done that yet, but if you sit at the blackjack table long enough, you will lose eventually. You might be able to come back up, you might not. It just depends on what's going on. So what we try to do is we try to take that variable out of the equation, where you never have to lose. You really don't. It's true. And you just have to structure everything correctly.
I have a friend who works at the casino, and I was talking to him the other night, and he looked at me and he said, "How do you think we got approved for this loan to build this 10, $20 million structure?" It's because
Right.
we have paper that shows that we're going to make that.
The casino is not gambling. The house always wins. So the casino knows exactly what's going to happen. There can be some aberrations here or there, but on the long term, they know pretty much exactly what's going to happen, and they can take that, just like you said, they take that paper to the bank and they can say, "Hey, here's what's going on. This is what's happened over the last 10, 20 years." And the bank will say, "Yeah, no problem. We'll underwrite a loan for you on that." Yep.
So the next term I wanted to hop on, another thing that we're seeing everywhere is this idea that there's secrets of the rich, that there's 1, 2, 3 things that once someone teaches you these, then you'll suddenly be rich. You'll suddenly know all
Yeah.
the secrets. You'll suddenly be a player in the big game. And this is just one of the things that I think is more than anything just funny, that if there
Right.
were these 1, 2, 3 secrets, that they wouldn't be spread with everyone. And
Yeah.
then
Oh,
again, if
that's
they
all we
are,
have to do? Awesome.
yeah,
I guess I'll be
exactly.
rich. Yeah.
And then if they are spread with everyone, then it's nullified. Then they're not
Right.
secrets anyway. It's just
That's
things
right.
everyone knows. Yeah, I just wanted to get your thoughts on this. If you have discovered these secrets, what they may be, because I'm trying to be rich. And if there's these 3 secrets is all I need, then let's hear them.
Yeah. Yeah. I also think it's funny. And that's another thing that I think Gen Z is better attuned to, just because they grew up with social media. They understand like what people are already hearing out there and what people are trying to put out. And Gen Z has a lot of advantages that Gen X doesn't have. Like I'm still sometimes trying to figure out like how to make a post on social media, let alone
Mhm.
know be able to see the BS detector, so to speak. But
Yeah.
when people talk about secrets of the rich, this happens in my industry too, the life insurance industry. A lot of people get on, make videos about how the rich use life insurance to become richer and all this stuff. And it is true. It's not really something that the rich do because it's a secret. They just do it because it happens to be an asset that works for the strategies that they're implementing. And life insurance happens to just be kind of a special asset because it's based on actuarial math. You get some risk offset along with really respectable growth. And then that death benefit has some really strategic capabilities from a state tax planning perspective and all that stuff. And then there's ways you can fund it. So I'm just speaking from my industry, but usually when the people that are hopping on and saying that, most of the time, I don't think they really know any rich people. And I think they're just repeating maybe what they heard. I will say that talk about a secret of the rich. The secret of the rich is that they don't lose money. They don't go out there and take risk. And this is actually one of the things that led to me being in this business. My career before starting Stacked Life was I was in Silicon Valley. I had a 20-year career in tech. And part of that was as a data center real estate and finance advisory. And so we would be working on these big institutional investor deals where an institutional investor would come in and want to buy a big data center asset for whatever, $50 million. And what I was taught by my mentor in that business was that the number two things that they're worried about are control and risk. The rate of return isn't even in the top three, because what became apparent to me later, I didn't really understand it at the time, but I was like, why are the people with a lot of money, why do they have such different priorities than what we're taught? We're taught to take high risk to get a high return. They are like, we want no risk and we're still going to get a high return, but we don't care about the return on paper necessarily, because what ends up happening is they know that if they have control over a high quality asset, meaning low risk, they can create multiple rates of return on that same money using that asset. So it gets back to what I was saying before, where 3-4% returns are the same as a 12% return, a single 12% return. So if I were to say one secret of the rich is they don't take risk, and they stack guaranteed returns on top of each other. They may not be 100% guaranteed. A lot of times they are, just based on how they're structured. But they'll stack returns on top of each other, and it ends up blowing any kind of return, like high return that a typical investor might see out of the water because they structure it in a way they never have to sell. So it just keeps boom growing and growing on top of each other. So if I were to say one thing that I know is true from that perspective, that would be it. And it's not, there are definitely tax strategies. There are trust entities you can set up. There's corporate structure. All of that stuff is, of course, relevant and it matters, but probably not as much as just the idea of never losing and just stacking smaller guaranteed returns on top of each other. And you can really make some big money that way.
Mm. I feel like this idea of like secrets of the rich also comes from the older generations. You don't exactly see rich people out in the wild. You don't see
Right.
them flaunting their lifestyle. You just have an idea about it.
That's true.
And a lot of I really like to read, and in a lot of the books that I come across, the main character will run into a slightly older guy who sort of tutors them and nurtures them about whatever it is they're doing, be it business or in this case, economics. Um, and in that case, I could really see that being viewed as a secret of the rich. But then now we have this whole internet where you can kind of fact check. Back then, it was, oh, I heard this thing from this guy and he's successful. So it has to be his secret. It has to work because it worked
Right.
for him. But now we have so many different forms of information that kind of convolute with each other and all that. So I can see it being very confusing for the younger generations. But I see exactly what you're saying with the true secret of the risk is mitigating risk.
Yeah.
I think personally, it's a little harder for my generation to take risks because with inflation, with just how expensive it is to survive these days, it's pretty easy to dig yourself into a pretty big hole. Like one of my friends, for example, got paid his way through school, got himself a car, and he works his butt off every single day now, but he's still $100,000 in debt. And 20 years ago, 30 years ago, having $100,000 in debt would be almost unimaginable. But now that's something that 22-year-old kids are doing. What do you think about the willingness to take on risk for my generation? And if you think that risk is riskier these days, is one way to put it.
I think risk is a little bit riskier just because we've got some pretty high inflation right now and it's so available. Now, I will say that my generation, it also was pretty easy to get into debt. There are people in my generation that are still in hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, just depending on what they did with school. But the for you guys, like the school costs were so much higher when you went through it. When I went to college, I didn't go to a prestigious college or anything, but it was like a few $1,000s a semester. Now it's like tens of thousands, if not more. And cars are way more expensive. Houses are way more expensive. So a lot of
Just
things have
feeding yourself
become,
too.
yeah, food is more expensive. Absolutely. Now, you guys also make quite a bit more right out of the gate. I hear about people starting at six figures. I was starting at very like low five figures when I first got out of
Mm.
college. So that's the inflation side of it. But the other things that have happened, and I don't know exactly when this took place, or maybe it was always like this, but some of the federal school loan debt, you can't even bankrupt yourself out of that. Like it's always there. You can't get away
Mm.
from it. And so it's a dangerous piece. And part of the overall financial picture is that there's just a lot of credit available to people. However, on the flip side, I'll say there's also a lot more education. And I don't know, I think Gen Z is grabbing onto this a little bit more than other generations. There's a lot of education, there's a lot of good education out there that helps people understand how to get out of debt, things like that. Where there is maybe lacking education So most of the actual investment education is really just the same status quo kind of stuff that's been around for 50 years. But what's making a comeback is the things that were before 50 years ago, before the 80s. It was like life insurance was a big part of everyone's retirement plan. Annuities were a big part of people's retirement plan. Most people didn't take on risk by investing, they just saved. And I think that's starting to, people are waking up to the idea that they really don't know what's going to happen with their investment stuff. And so people are at least adding a little bit of certainty back into their financial life. And I think that's a good thing.
It's just a quick observation I had, something that I thought was funny when we were doing our whole college orientation. You're already taking the big risk. You're taking on all this debt to pay your way through college in the hope that it'll eventually lead to a better life. Then you show up to orientation and there's these people sitting outside trying to sell you a credit card just right off the bat.
Hey, buddy, guess what? That was happening in my college days as well. That was my first credit card. I think it was called Next Card. And I went ahead and racked that up right off the bat. And yeah, you're right. That's been going on for a while.
And I don't want to get political or anything, but it's in our nation's best interest if we spend. We do live in a sort of consumer culture that, you know, maybe we're seeing this change to saving as people get maybe a little more educated on the goals of how our economy is set up. And if you're spending at all, the economy is happy. Whether you win big, whether you lose, their goal is that you spend.
That may be their goal, but it's not the correct goal in my view. The idea that the economy is run by spending, I think, is upside down. Because if you just go to the very basic fundamentals of what we need to live, you have to catch a fish before you can eat a fish. So you can't eat before you produce. So it's the same thing on the macroeconomic level. Savings is what drives an economy, not spending. Because if you look at all the spending, it's just debt. Yes, it does drive things forward, but it's completely unsustainable, especially at the clip that we're going, where I think we really need to refocus everyone and be a lot more savings focused than spending focused like we have been for a long time.
Do you think our society should be more set up to provide for everyone, or do you think an individual providing for themselves is more realistic or sustainable?
It's a great question, and it is a little bit complicated. I do not think a society should be structured in a way that society provides for everyone, because in order to do that, this gets a little political. That's what socialism is supposed to do. And
that's why I wanted to bring it up, because in my generation, I see so many people that are like, they love Karl Marx and they think socialism is like a realistic strategy, but they have never read history in their life or looked into what happened there. So that's why I wanted to bring it up, just because I think that's a very interesting generational divide.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly how old you are, but when my parents were growing up, it was like we were like in the Cold War because of communism. Like it's very different viewpoints.
I'm 50, and I would say that there were definitely fewer people who were as open to socialism and communism when I was growing up, but it's definitely grown. And I don't know that I know why, but the thing about it is a government that can provide everything you want, if they have enough control to do that, they have enough control to take away everything you have. And so it's a problem. Number one, if you just look around, like anywhere they try socialism and communism, it never works. And sometimes it doesn't work so bad that like hundreds of millions of people die. And it's really not a thing that I think is a worthy goal. However, I do think it's possible for society working together as individuals, so having strong property rights and working together as free individuals. They actually can create a structure if they have the right know-how. the thing, it goes back to the secrets of the rich sort of thing. A lot of people are so envious of the rich and they're so hateful of the rich. They want to tax the rich, tax the billionaires, do all this stuff. Meanwhile, they're not really doing anything that's out of touch for what we can do ourselves. We can do the things that they're doing. We just don't know how. However, I think if people tried to learn, things could be a little bit different. And the other interesting thing is, in a free society like right now, anyone in this country could get together and form a group of people and create a socialist economy amongst themselves. They have the freedom to do that. They can absolutely do it. But no one does it because I don't know why. It's been tried before with communes and things like that. They usually never work.
My personal
Yeah.
belief in that matter is just, as much as it's not good, as much as you work on getting it out of your psyche, greed is a part of the human nature. Whether it be you or someone else in the group, someone's going to end up eventually wanting a little more than what they necessarily need to survive. And also, it's being a human being isn't necessarily just getting the bare minimum and surviving. Like, sometimes it's good to enjoy a luxury every once in a while, and that doesn't mean that you're a bad person. That doesn't mean that you're not providing for your fellow human or anything like that. It's just, human beings, I think, deserve luxury if they're willing to work for it.
Or even just opportunity. There's just so many examples throughout history that freer markets perform better. The countries that get out of poverty are the ones that turn towards free markets. The ones that put themselves into poverty are the ones that lean towards socialism. It's just the data's there. I don't know why anyone does anything. And it's not immoral to have control over your own gains, whatever the efforts that you put into something. Just because someone else gets rich, it doesn't make you not get rich.
I liked what you were saying
Yeah.
earlier. I feel like there's two sides. Like, one side is, oh, the rich are disgusting, I hate the rich. And the other side is idolizing these people as
Right.
almost more than a human.
Right.
But the real true middle is, you look at someone who's rich and you say, oh, that's a human being just like me. Me and that person are the exact same thing. We may have had slightly different opportunities, but that doesn't mean that we didn't come from the exact same place. Like,
A really interesting thing is that when people examine things by economic class, what's interesting is most of the rich, if you follow the individual families, most of them don't actually stay super rich. And if you also, conversely, if you follow individual poor people and poor families, most of them also do not stay poor. And so there's a big problem when people try to analyze just across economic strata. There's the individual people moving in and out of those. It's actually not representative of what's happening with those people. One interesting thing, though, is if you think about it, socialism does work in small groups like a family. Because if you think about what happens in a family, that's basically socialism. You're
assets are
redistributing wealth,
shared.
and
Yeah.
everything's shared. Everything's controlled by the authority, which is the family, mom or dad or grandpa or whoever it is. And that works because why? Because we actually care about those people and we have a vested interest in seeing that those people survive and thrive. But it really just completely stops working once you get past a certain number and you really don't have any moral relationship with those people anymore. And so it gets back down to the family. So if people are into socialism, we should actually focus on the family, get back to that, rather than trying to recreate that and trying to make the entire country one family, because that's just never going to happen.
Mhm.
And I guess I just go back to my point that anyone can do the things that the rich are doing, and we don't need to redistribute anything. Anyone can do it. You just have to get educated and you have to understand how it works.
Mhm. And as we were discussing earlier, you might at some point have to take on some risk and be willing to take that on. But I
No,
think,
you don't actually.
no.
That's what I'm getting at is you truly do not have to take on risk just from a money perspective.
Mhm.
Um, in order to get really good growth and build wealth. Now, let's talk about risk, though, in another way. Calls it is spice of life. We're not all just here to put money into a savings account and watch it slowly grow up like we're robots or something. We all need to have a mission. We all need to go out there and try to live our lives and have the excitement of whatever gets us out of bed in the morning. And the idea is that if you have a good portion of your financial life guaranteed with no risk, that gives you a permission slip to go out and take some risk in other areas of your life. For example, we use whole life insurance as like a supercharged savings account. That's where we build our capital base. When it was time, I was at a crossroads with my tech career, and I was thinking about getting into this business, and that's a risk. And I decided to get into this business, and I jumped in with both feet, and I took a risk. But because I had the guarantees and the cash and the liquidity, which just means access to my money, because I had that, I was able to take that risk without betting the farm. You know what I mean? Now, it was certainly a struggle. I got a little help along the way as well. But I was able to do it because I had a bunch of money saved up. And so most people are not able to take real risks that can provide true reward. Like, how can I possibly calculate the rate of return on now being in a career that I'm the happiest I've ever been professionally, not to mention personally, but professionally, I'm the happiest I've ever been. I'm making more money than I've ever made. And I view my mission as valid, and I'm really helping people replicate what I was able to do in my own life. And how can I put a rate of return? What's the rate of return on
I'd
that?
say that's the best rate of return you can get right
That's
there.
right. But you can't put a number to it, right?
Yeah, you can't put
That's
that in
the
a
kind of
calculator.
that's the kind of risk people should be setting themselves up to take. And no one's doing it because they're just taking the first investment that comes along. They're putting their money into it. Even worse, they're putting it into qualified plans where it's just locked away from them for 30 years. They have no access. Like, they're living check to check because they're maybe getting statement rich, like their 401k is growing or not growing or whatever. But they're like their life poor because they're locked into a certain trajectory and they can't do anything.
No, that makes total sense. We're here to talk about wealth and accumulating wealth, but that's only one part of being alive and being successful. And as you were saying earlier, you can't calculate the rate of return for personal or professional happiness or things like that. Or you can't calculate just wanting to get out of bed every morning and being happy to
Right.
do what you do. And
Yeah.
I think most people would argue that is the goal.
Yeah.
Like, you want to find things that make you happy and make you feel fulfilled. And of course, it's often easier to find those things and do your passions when you do have a little bit of wealth laying around. So that's an important factor in that. But it's just one part of a grand scheme.
Yeah. And if I were to wish for a couple things for Gen Z to do, it would be to focus on savings, and then focus on building cash flow and income. Don't just put your money and hope to get some kind of growth or rate of return. Put your money into things that create more income, because the more income you have, if you have the correct cash flow structure to also watch your expenses, the more income you have, the more you can enjoy life and the more you can actually grow the income even more. And that's where we get into just stacking returns on top of each other.
I totally get why, because property taxes are crazy and just property itself is almost unaffordable for younger people. But I feel like we're seeing less and less people actually try to set up real businesses in the real world. Like, you never really hear about a Gen Z person buying a bar and fixing it up and making their money off that or something like that. It's
Right.
always, oh, I found this crypto coin and
Yeah.
I doubled my money just sitting around. And it's, yeah, maybe you did that, but maybe buying a bar with your friends and fixing it up would feel a lot more fulfilling.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I do think a lot of Gen Z people, even a lot of Gen X people, they do get some fulfillment out of this crypto thing that's happening right now. But I agree with you.
It's
Wouldn't
just
it be
my
cool to,
personal preference. No
there you
judgment
go.
to anyone or anything,
Yeah,
but
yeah, of course, of course. I'll tell you, my professional opinion is that crypto should be a very small part of your overall what you're doing, because it really is a speculation. There's a lot of people want to say it's going to become the next currency. It might. By the way, have crypto. I do all that stuff, but it's not a big part of what I'm doing. And I've had to talk a few people off the ledge with crypto because they were putting everything into it. And I'm like, hey man, you got to dial that back a little
There's
bit.
some volatility involved
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
that, definitely.
Yeah.
Another thing I see a lot of online is, you just give your money to a hedge fund manager and let them handle it, and they'll slowly get you rich. But my first thought when I see something like this, just like a lot of the other things we've been talking about, if that truly was the solution, why doesn't every single person in the world do that? If you can truly just give your money to someone and they'll make money off of that every single time. Another factor of that is you got to consider, why would they take you on as a client if they're not benefiting in that some way? You'd like to hope that the relationship is symbiotic and you're both benefiting at the same time, but still I feel like there's a lot of sides to this idea of a hedge fund manager, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. To your point that why would they take you on? I would say hedge funds are probably less common for people to invest in, but the model is similar where people just put their money into ETFs or, different mutual funds, like some of the different financial personalities out there just say, yeah, put your money into mutual funds or low cost ETFs. It's the same model. A hedge fund is going to be different, but you're just giving your money to someone to do something with. So in that sense, it's the same. It is a symbiotic relationship, but there are some parties that it's more symbiotic than others. That's not really the term, but you hear about hedge fund manager billionaires, but you don't usually hear about hedge fund investor billionaires, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's just because there's usually like another thing that's happening behind the scenes, that capital that the investors are bringing in, they're doing some things with that is unrelated to the actual fund, and so they're returning the return that they're supposed to give to their investors or not, and then they're using the capital to do all the other things that I was talking about before on their end. It's not illegal or immoral. You're getting what you're told you're going to get. It's just a lot of times people don't realize, wow, there's a whole lot more happening on the back end of this than that's
Mm-hmm.
happening on the end that I'm on. But people don't know how to do it. That's just is what it is. And so those are some of the things that we're tackling on our end with some new companies that we'll be launching soon that I'm a part of, where we're building a company that'll be a membership platform that everyone gets to partake in the whole pie if you're a part of it. And so we're going to be resetting that paradigm here in the next 6 months.
That's exciting. And I like that idea. There's not a hedge fund manager. You're all managers together, if I'm understanding the concept correctly.
Yeah, we're basically building a platform that no one's more important than anyone else. It's all just
Mhm.
based on how much capital you can contribute, and you get the same benefits as the president of the company, just based on pro rata how much money you've brought to the table.
Mhm.
So it's all going to be very fair.
Thank you very much for sharing your knowledge, and I will do my best to spread it throughout Gen Z, and we'll do our best to learn where we can. And yeah, I'm just happy to have the opportunity to meet with you and talk through things, and I hope we'll get to do this again soon.
Hey, it was really great talking to you, and definitely appreciate your open mindedness to learning about some new things, and looking forward to talking again.